Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we unpack the latest and greatest in AI research. Today, we're looking at a really interesting paper out of Stanford.
That's right. It's called Packing Input Frame Context in Next Frame Prediction Models for Video Generation.
By Elviman Zhang and Manish Agrawala. And if you're working in video generation, you know this core challenge, right?
Oh, yeah.
How do you give these models enough memory, enough context of past frames so the video flows smoothly, but without that same memory causing the quality to just degrade over time, that whole drifting issue?
Exactly. And then there's the compute cost. Trying to feed long sequences into transformers, it gets hairy fast.
So this paper proposes a solution, FramePack. Our mission today is to really understand how FramePack tackles these big problems in next frame video prediction.
It's a fundamental balancing act, isn't it? More memory can mean better coherence, potentially.
Yeah.
But also means errors can build up.
Right.
But if you try too hard to fix errors frame by frame, you might lose the plot, temporally speaking. It forgets the context. FramePack offers a clever route through this.
Okay, so for listeners maybe short on time or for that quick summary clip, what's the essence of FramePack? What are the key insights here?
Okay, in a nutshell, FramePack is a way to structure the neural network for predicting the next frame. It hits those memory and drifting issues we mentioned.
Oh.
The key idea is compressing the input frames, but based on how important they are, relatively speaking. This lets it keep a fixed context length for the transformer, no matter how long the video gets.
Ah, okay. Fixed context length.
Yeah, which means you can process way more frames without that computational cost blowing up. It keeps it closer to, say, image diffusion costs.
Wow, okay.
And they don't stop there. They also introduce new ways to sample frames anti-drifting methods. One uses inverted time order, another generates start and end points early. These really seem to help visual quality.
And it works with existing models.
That's the beauty of it. They show you can fine-tune current video diffusion models with FramePack and potentially get these quality improvements.
Got it. Okay, let's dig deeper into that forgetting and drifting problem first. Can you elaborate a bit more on why that's such a bottleneck?
For sure. So think about generating a video. The model needs to know what happened before to predict what comes next, right?
Yeah.
For consistency.
Makes sense.
That means holding on to past frames' temporal context. But the longer the video, the more frames you need to remember.
And that's where the trouble starts.
Yeah, because if the model messes up even slightly on an early frame, that error can just cascade. It gets amplified as it predicts more frames, leading to that visual messiness, the drifting.
Yeah.
But if you go the other way, maybe only look at the very last frame to avoid error buildup, the video might become choppy or nonsensical.
Yeah.
It feels like the model's forgotten the beginning. It's this trade-off that's really limited, generating like really long, high-quality videos.
And I guess just throwing more compute power at it by feeding all the frames into a standard transformer isn't really practical?
Not at all. Standard transformers, even the optimized ones, often have this attention mechanism where the compute scales quadratically or close to it with the input length. Meaning double the frames. And you could need 4 times the compute or even more. For a long video, that just becomes impossible.
Yeah.
Huge memory, huge processing needed.
Right.
Plus, let's be honest, consecutive video frames are often really similar, aren't they? There's a ton of redundancy.
Yeah, not much changes frame to frame sometimes.
Exactly. So that redundancy kind of screams, compress me, which is exactly what FramePack tries to do intelligently.
Okay, so that leads us nicely into FramePack itself, this anti-forgetting memory structure. What's the core mechanic behind it? How does it handle more context without that computational blowup?
So the main idea, the heart of FramePack is this. Compress the input frames, but do it smartly so that the total amount of information, the context length fed into the transformer, stays the same.
Stays the same, even as the video gets longer.
Right. The trick is realizing that not all past frames are equally vital for predicting the very next frame. Stuff that happened further back may be less critical than what just happened.
Okay, so it prioritizes.
Exactly. It compresses older frames more aggressively, keeping more detail from the recent past.
How does it quantify that? How does it decide the compression level?
They use what they call a length function, phi of phi for frame I. This basically sets how many tokens that frame turns into after the initial processing, the patchifying. And this function uses a compression parameter. They call it lambda. Older frames, based on this lambda, get progressively squeezed down, contributing fewer tokens to the total context.
Progressively squeezed.
Yeah.
Okay, so older frames take up less space, but how does that stop the total space from just growing anyway as you add more and more frames?
That's the clever part. Because the compression is progressive, The total context length sum of tokens from all input frames follows a geometric series.
Like 1 plus 12 plus 14 plus 18?
Exactly like that, controlled by lambda. And the neat thing about geometric series like that is they converge. As you add more terms, more frames, the total sum approaches a finite limit.
It doesn't grow infinitely.
Precisely. So the transformer's main bottleneck, that context length, becomes effectively capped. It doesn't depend on the raw video length anymore. Beyond a certain point, you can feed in super long videos, and the compute cost stays relatively stable. That's the game changer.
Wow, okay, that is clever. They mention using lambda equals 2 mostly, but also that you can get other rates. How flexible is it?
Yeah, lambda 2 is nice and efficient. Power of 2 stuff works well on GPUs, but they show you can get other effective compression rates, like say 2.625. By basically tweaking the terms in that geometric series. You might duplicate certain compression levels, like include the 12 term twice or the 18 term twice, based on their example for 2.625. By playing with which terms are in the sequence, you can fine-tune the overall rate.
Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty. How is this compression actually done at the frame level? They talk about the patchifying kernel size. PF, PH, PW.
Right, so the first layer of the transformer that looks at the video is usually a 3D convolution.
Right.
It takes patches across time frame index F, height H, and width W. The size and stride of this 3D kernel is the compression mechanism. Bigger strides mean you skip more pixels or frames, effectively downsampling and compressing that frame more.
So the kernel dimensions control the compression rate for a given frame.
Exactly. And importantly, you could achieve the same overall compression rate, say 64x, in different ways. You could compress heavily in time or mostly in space, or a mix. These different schedules, as they call them, might be better for different kinds of videos.
And Figure 1 shows some of these variations, the standard geometric one, ones with duplicated levels, temporal kernels. What's the point of exploring all these?
Flexibility, mostly. A schedule that duplicates levels might emphasize certain time scales. A temporal kernel compresses multiple frames together right away, maybe better for motion. Ones that focus on the start or end frames are good for, like image to video, where the start image is key, or video completion tasks.
Makes sense. They also mentioned using independent patchifying parameters for different compression rates. Why is that important? Sounds like a training detail.
It's a crucial one for stability, yeah. Learning features for a frame compressed 2x might be very different from learning features for one compressed, say 64x.
Right.
So instead of one set of weights trying to handle all compression levels, they use separate convolutional layers for a few key rates. They mentioned using kernels for roughly 16x, 64x, and 256x compression.
And for even higher compression.
For even higher rates, they first downsample the frame spatially, then feed it into the layer with the biggest kernel, the 276x one in their setup. This specialization helps the network learn better. And they initialize these layers by interpolating weights from existing models, which helps training start smoothly.
Okay, what about super, super long videos, where even the most compressed frames become tiny? They mentioned tail options.
Right. Eventually, a frame might get compressed down to just a few latent units, maybe even 1 pixel's worth of information. This tail of really old, heavily compressed frames needs handling.
So what do?
They tried a few things. 1, just drop them, delete the tail. 2, let each tail frame add just 1 extra pixel to the context length, a tiny increase. 3, average all the tail frames together, global average pooling, and process that average representation with the biggest kernel.
And did it matter much which option they used?
Interestingly, they found the visual differences were pretty small, which suggests that once frames get that compressed, the exact handling isn't super critical. And remember, tail means most compressed, not strictly oldest, depending on the schedule.
Gotcha. And one more detail on the structure. Ropey, the rotary position embeddings. Since frames are compressed differently, their positions need aligning.
Exactly. Ropey encodes where each token is in the sequence. If one frame becomes 16 tokens and another becomes only 1 token due to compression, you need to make sure the positional signals match up.
How do they fix that?
They downsample the Ropey signals themselves, the phase components, using average pooling. The amount of pooling matches the compression factor the kernel used for that frame.
Yeah.
It keeps the positional info consistent with the visual info.
Okay, that's a really thorough look at the FramePack structure for handling context. Now, let's pivot back to the other big problem, drifting. What are these anti-drifting sampling methods they came up with?
So the authors noticed, like many others, that this drifting issue seems worst with standard causal sampling. That's where the model only ever sees past frames to predict the future ones.
Makes sense. Errors just propagate forward.
Right, but they made a key observation. Just giving the model access to one future frame, even just one, seemed to dramatically reduce or even stop the drifting.
Interesting. So seeing the future helps.
It strongly suggests that having some kind of bidirectional view, knowing something about where the video is going, is really important for maintaining quality.
So how did they incorporate that into sampling, beyond the standard way of just predicting frame after frame?
Well, the standard way is what they call vanilla sampling, just iterative autoregressive prediction. Go forward one step at a time.
Okay.
To fight drift, they introduced an anti-drifting method. Here's the cool part. In the very first step, the model doesn't just predict the next few frames. It predicts a chunk of frames at the beginning of the video and a chunk at the very end simultaneously.
Start and end points first.
Exactly. Then, in the following steps, it fills in the gaps between those established start and end points. By anchoring both ends early, it prevents that accumulated error from running away.
That's really clever, like setting boundaries. And what about the inverted anti-drifting method?
The inverted approach takes that idea but flips the timeline. It generates frames backward, from a known endpoint towards the beginning.
Why would you do that?
It's particularly good for image-to-video tasks. You have the user's input image, right? That's your high-quality known endpoint, the future frame.
Okay.
So the model works backward from that image, generating the frames that logically lead up to it. This forces consistency with that high-quality anchor, really suppressing drift.
Got it. Very neat for that specific use case. Can these methods generate really long videos? Or are they limited by that initial start end generation?
No, they can all generate arbitrary lengths. For vanilla, you just keep iterating. For the anti-drifting ones, you can either dynamically move the endpoints further apart as you fill the middle, or the more practical way they mention is just set a really wide initial time range, like generate the first 10 seconds and the last 10 seconds of a minute-long target video in the first pass. That often provides enough anchoring, and you can repeat if needed for even longer sequences.
And I assume Ropey needs adjusting again for these non-sequential sampling methods.
You bet. Since you're not always generating frames right next to each other in time, you can't just apply Ropey sequentially.
So what's the fix?
They basically just skip the Ropey time indices for the frames that aren't being generated in a given step. So the positional codes only get applied to the frames the model is actually working on at that moment. Keeps everything aligned even when jumping around in time.
All right, makes sense. So they have FramePack for context, these clever sampling methods for drift. How did they prove it all works? What did the experiments show?
They put FramePack into two pretty strong existing video diffusion models, One and Hunyuan Video. And it's worth pointing out, because FramePack works on next frame prediction, it's slotted nicely into both text-to-video and image-to-video setups without major changes.
Versatile. They use this kind of dense naming convention in their results table, Table 1. Can you decode one of those for us? Like TDS 16K4, F4K2, F1K1, OG9 by F1K1.
Yeah. It looks cryptic, but it's compact. Let's break it down. Yeah. TD usually means tail deletion. That's one of the tail handling options.
Yeah.
Then F16K4 means the first 16 frames use a kernel size represented by K4. They simplify kernel notation. F4K2 means the next 4 frames use kernel K2. F1K1, the next frame uses kernel K1. It describes the FramePack schedule.
Got it. Frame schedule.
G9 means generate 9 frames per section in the anti-drifting methods. And F1K1 relates to how they handle explicit endpoints. The overall structure also tells you if it was vanilla, anti-drifting, or inverted sampling.
Right, quite dense. So looking at that table and their analysis, what were the big takeaways from the ablation studies?
The clearest finding was that the inverted anti-drifting sampling generally performed best, especially on metrics measuring drift. That backward generation from a known point really seems to work.
Okay, inverted wins on drift.
They also found G9 generating 9 frames per section seemed to be what human testers preferred visually.
Interesting.
And kind of funny, the vanilla method sometimes got high dynamic scores, but they think that might just be the model going wild due to drift, not actual intended dynamism.
Uncontrolled motion looking like dynamics.
Yeah. And finally, while the specific kernel choices and tail options mattered a bit, the biggest difference came from choosing the sampling method itself, vanilla versus anti-drifting versus inverted. That had more impact than the finer details within each method.
So sampling strategy is key. How did FramePack plus their best sampling method compare against other approaches people have tried for long videos, like anchor frames or causal attention?
They did compare against several other things conceptually similar to streaming T2V, anchor frames, causal causal attention, diffusion forcing, noisy history guidance.
Yeah.
And their method, specifically FramePack with inverted anti-drifting sampling, came out on top in the global quality metrics and significantly dominated the metrics designed to catch drifting issues. And again, this matched what human reviewers preferred in A/B tests.
Pretty definitive results then. They also made a point about training cost, that FramePack is feasible on a smaller scale.
Huge point. They managed training with batch sizes similar to the image diffusion, running on just a single 8 GPU node, 8x100s. That's accessible.
Right. Yeah, not a giant cluster needed.
Exactly. It makes this kind of advanced video generation research potentially doable for more labs, not just the huge ones. They also mentioned using Addifactor Optimizer, fixed learning rate, and tweaking flow shift values, which they felt contributed to getting sharper, cleaner results.
And finally, they backed all this up with a whole suite of evaluation metrics, right? Not just one or two numbers.
Oh yeah, very comprehensive.
Yeah.
They use standard things like MUSE for clarity, LAIN scores for aesthetics, RAFT for motion, VA for semantic meaning, VIT for anatomy, ArcFace for keeping identities consistent, plus, crucially, their own start-end contrast metric, delta M drift, to directly measure that visual degradation over time. And the human ELO scores on top of all that.
Very thorough. Okay, let's try and wrap this up. For our audience AI researchers, ML engineers, what's the core takeaway from this FramePack paper?
I'd say the core contribution is providing a really practical, effective framework, FramePack, plus the sampling methods that directly confronts that awful forgetting versus drifting trade-off in video generation.
Yep.
By packing context smartly to keep compute manageable and using these bidirectional sampling tricks, they've shown a clear path to making longer, better-looking, more coherent videos.
And for people actively building or researching video models, what's the immediate relevance? What should they be thinking about?
Well, first, FramePack offers a way to handle much longer sequences without needing a supercomputer, which is huge. Second, it seems compatible with existing models, meaning you could potentially integrate or fine-tune with these ideas relatively easily.
Right.
And third, the idea of different compression schedules offers a knob to turn, a way to optimize context handling for specific types of video data or tasks. Lots of potential there.
Absolutely fascinating work, really pushing things forward. Okay, as we finish this deep dive, here's something to mull over. We've seen how FramePack manages long context and fights drift in video. How could these fundamental ideas, efficient context management, bidirectional anchoring, apply elsewhere?
Interesting question.
Could we see similar thinking applied to, say, generating extremely long text documents? Or maybe modeling really complex, long-range time series data in finance or science? What new problems or maybe even new architectural tweaks would we need to consider for those different kinds of sequences? Something to think about for sure.
Definitely food for thought.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.